Sarah Mitchell stared at her reflection in the coffee shop window, wondering why she had agreed to this blind date in the first place. Her best friend Emma had been relentless for weeks, insisting that David was perfect for her. "He's kind, funny, and really down to earth," Emma had said repeatedly. What Emma hadn't mentioned was that David would be arriving 15 minutes late, wearing a wrinkled shirt and carrying what appeared to be a worn leather messenger bag that had seen better days. When David finally walked through the door, Sarah had to suppress a laugh. He was nothing like she had imagined. His hair looked like he had just rolled out of bed, his glasses were slightly crooked, and he moved with an awkward shuffle that reminded her of her high school math teacher. As he approached her table, he accidentally bumped into a chair, causing it to scrape loudly against the floor. Several customers turned to look, and Sarah felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. "Sarah, I'm David. Sorry I'm late, traffic was terrible," he said, extending a slightly trembling hand. His palm was damp with nervous sweat, and when he sat down, he immediately knocked over the sugar dispenser. Sarah watched in dismay as tiny white crystals scattered across the dark wooden table. This was definitely not going according to plan. David's conversation skills weren't much better than his coordination. He stumbled over his words, told a joke that made no sense, and spent 10 minutes explaining his job at a tech company in terms so complicated that Sarah's eyes glazed over. She found herself checking her phone repeatedly, calculating how long she needed to stay to be polite. 30 more minutes, she decided. She could endure 30 more minutes of this disaster. The coffee shop was busy that afternoon, filled with the usual mix of students studying, business people having meetings, and couples enjoying leisurely conversations. Sarah envied those other couples. They seemed to be having actual fun, while she was trapped listening to David explain the intricacies of computer programming. When he started drawing diagrams on napkins, she seriously considered faking a family emergency. But something about David's enthusiasm, despite his obvious nervousness, kept her from leaving immediately. There was a genuine quality to his awkwardness that was almost endearing. He wasn't trying to impress her with false confidence or smooth pickup lines. He was just being himself, even if that self was currently spilling coffee on his already wrinkled shirt. As David continued talking, Sarah noticed small details about him that she hadn't seen initially. His eyes lit up when he discussed something he was passionate about. His hands moved expressively as he spoke, even though they occasionally knocked things over. There was an intelligence behind his scattered presentation that suggested depth she hadn't expected. Still, when her phone buzzed with a text message, Sarah felt relieved to have a distraction. She glanced down at the screen, expecting to see a message from Emma asking how the date was going. Instead, she saw an unknown number with a message that made her blood run cold. "I know where you are. You can't hide from me forever." The message was followed by a photo taken through the coffee shop window, clearly showing her sitting at the table. Sarah's hands began to shake as she read the message again. This wasn't the first threatening text she had received. For the past 3 weeks, someone had been sending her increasingly disturbing messages. First, they were generic threats that she had dismissed as wrong numbers or pranks. Then they became more specific, mentioning places she had been and things she had done. She had reported them to the police, but without more concrete evidence, there was little they could do. Now, seeing that photograph, Sarah realized that whoever was sending these messages was actually watching her. They knew where she was at this very moment. Her heart began to race as she looked around the coffee shop, trying to spot anyone who might be paying unusual attention to her table. The friendly atmosphere suddenly felt menacing, and every stranger became a potential threat. David noticed the change in her demeanor immediately. His rambling explanation of server architectures came to an abrupt halt as he saw the fear in her eyes. "Sarah, what's wrong?" "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, his own nervous energy shifting into concern. She looked up at him, this man she had been dismissing as harmless and boring, and realized that she was genuinely frightened. "I think someone is watching me," she whispered, sliding her phone across the table so David could see the message. His reaction surprised her. Instead of the confusion or dismissive response she might have expected, his expression became immediately serious and alert. The bumbling, nervous man from moments before seemed to transform before her eyes into someone completely different. David's entire demeanor shifted as he read the threatening message. The nervous, clumsy man who had been spilling sugar and stumbling over words suddenly became focused and alert. His eyes quickly scanned the coffee shop, taking in details that Sarah hadn't even noticed. He observed the positioning of exits, the location of security cameras, and the behavior patterns of every customer in the vicinity. "How long have you been receiving these messages?" David asked quietly, his voice now steady and controlled. Sarah was startled by the transformation. This wasn't the same person who had been awkwardly explaining computer programs just minutes earlier. There was a professional quality to his questions, a systematic approach that suggested experience with dangerous situations. Sarah explained about the 3 weeks of escalating threats, how they had started as generic harassment, but had become increasingly personal and specific. David listened intently, occasionally asking precise questions about timing, locations, and whether she had noticed anyone following her. His questions were so detailed and methodical that Sarah began to wonder if there was more to her blind date than Emma had revealed. "We need to leave here immediately, but we need to do it carefully," David said, pulling out his own phone. His fingers moved across the screen with practiced efficiency, and Sarah caught glimpses of what looked like security applications and encrypted messaging systems. "I'm going to call for backup, and then we're going to walk out of here together. Stay close to me and try to act natural." Sarah was confused and slightly scared by David's sudden transformation, but the fear of her stalker outweighed her concerns about her date's mysterious behavior. As David made his phone call, speaking in low, urgent tones using terminology she didn't recognize, Sarah realized that this awkward blind date might be the only thing standing between her and serious danger. Within minutes, David had coordinated what appeared to be a complex security operation. He guided Sarah toward the coffee shop's back exit, his eyes constantly monitoring their surroundings. His movements were fluid and purposeful, completely different from the clumsy person who had knocked over chairs when he arrived. Sarah found herself following his lead without question, trusting instincts she didn't fully understand. As they approached the rear exit, David's phone buzzed with updates from whoever he had contacted. He read the messages quickly, his expression growing more serious. "Sarah, I need you to stay calm, but we have a problem. There are at least 2 people watching this building, and they're positioned to cover both the front and back exits. We're going to need to get creative about how we leave here." The revelation that multiple people were involved in watching her sent a chill down Sarah's spine. What had started as annoying text messages had clearly escalated into something much more serious and organized. She looked at David with new appreciation, realizing that his presence might be the only reason she wasn't walking into a trap. David led her to the coffee shop's small employee break room, where he quickly explained the situation to the manager. His calm authority and obvious expertise convinced the woman to cooperate without asking too many questions. Within minutes, David had arranged for them to leave through a service entrance that connected to the adjacent building's delivery area. As they prepared to make their escape, Sarah couldn't help but ask the question that had been building in her mind. "David, who are you really? This isn't normal behavior for a computer programmer." David paused in his preparations and looked at her directly. For the first time since the crisis began, she saw a hint of his earlier nervousness return. "I do work in tech, but not exactly the way I explained earlier," he admitted. "I work in cybersecurity and threat assessment for a government contractor. Part of my job involves protecting people who are being targeted by digital stalkers and online predators. I've been doing this kind of work for 8 years, but I don't usually talk about it on dates because it tends to make people uncomfortable." Sarah stared at him in amazement. The clumsy, awkward man she had been ready to dismiss as a disaster was actually some kind of security expert. His bumbling behavior earlier had been genuine nervousness about the date, not incompetence in handling dangerous situations. She realized that Emma probably had no idea about the true nature of David's work when she set them up. David's phone buzzed again, and his expression became urgent. "We need to move now. My colleagues have identified the people watching the building, and they're starting to close in on the exits. Are you ready to trust me completely for the next few minutes?" Sarah nodded, realizing that her life might literally depend on following David's instructions exactly. David moved with the precision of someone trained in emergency situations. He guided Sarah through the service entrance and into a narrow alley behind the coffee shop, constantly communicating through his earpiece with team members positioned around the area. Sarah was amazed by the level of coordination and professionalism being deployed to protect her from what she had initially thought was just a harassment problem. "Stay directly behind me and match my pace exactly," David instructed as they moved through the alley system. His earlier clumsiness had completely disappeared, replaced by smooth, calculated movements. He navigated the urban landscape like someone intimately familiar with escape routes and surveillance blind spots. Sarah realized that his awkward arrival at the coffee shop had probably been carefully planned to make him appear harmless and unremarkable. As they reached the end of the first alley, David suddenly stopped and pressed Sarah against the brick wall. Through hand signals, he indicated that they needed to remain completely silent. Sarah could hear footsteps echoing from multiple directions, and she began to understand the complexity of the threat they were facing. This wasn't just one disturbed individual sending threatening messages. It was an organized group with the resources to coordinate surveillance and pursuit. David's earpiece crackled with updates from his team. Sarah caught fragments of the communication. Target acquired. Moving to position 3. Confirm identity on subject 2. The professional terminology and coordinated response made it clear that David's colleagues were experienced in handling these types of situations. Sarah felt both relieved and terrified by the realization of how serious her situation had become. After several tense minutes, David received clearance to move to the next phase of their escape. He led Sarah through a maze of side streets and connecting passages that she never would have noticed on her own. His knowledge of the urban environment was encyclopedic, suggesting years of experience in surveillance and counter-surveillance operations. Every turn seemed calculated to avoid potential observation points and create maximum confusion for anyone trying to follow them. "David, how did you know this was going to happen today?" Sarah asked during a brief pause in their movement. "Did Emma tell you about my stalking problem?" David shook his head, his expression grim. "Emma doesn't know anything about your situation, and she doesn't know the real nature of my work. This is an incredible coincidence, or possibly something more calculated than we initially realized." The implication of David's words hit Sarah like a cold wave. If their meeting wasn't a coincidence, it meant that someone had manipulated the entire situation. Perhaps her stalkers had somehow arranged for her to be at that specific location at that specific time. The thought that her blind date might have been part of an elaborate trap made her feel nauseated and betrayed. David noticed her distress and quickly provided reassurance. "Sarah, I know this is overwhelming, but I need you to focus on staying safe right now. My team is running background checks on everyone connected to your social circle, including Emma and how she knew to set up this date. We'll figure out how this all connects, but first we need to get you to a secure location." They continued moving through the urban landscape, with David maintaining constant communication with his surveillance team. Sarah learned that his colleagues had identified at least 4 individuals who appeared to be coordinating the stalking operation. The sophistication of the group suggested that this wasn't random harassment, but a targeted campaign with specific objectives that hadn't yet been revealed. As they approached what David described as a safe house, Sarah's phone buzzed with another message from her stalker. This time the text was different. "Your new friend is very clever, but we know who he is and where he works. This changes nothing. You cannot hide forever." Attached to the message was a photograph of David taken several days earlier outside what appeared to be a government building. David's expression darkened as he read the message. "They've been watching both of us longer than we realized. This isn't just about you, Sarah. Someone has been planning this operation for weeks, possibly months. They knew about our date before we did." The revelation that David had also been under surveillance added a new layer of complexity to an already dangerous situation. "Who would want to target both of us?" Sarah asked, struggling to understand the scope of what they were facing. David was quiet for a moment, clearly processing the implications of the new information. "I've worked on dozens of cases involving online predators and digital stalkers. Any number of people might have reason to want revenge against me. But the fact that they targeted you specifically suggests this might be connected to one of my previous cases." As they reached the secure location, David's team was already in position to provide protection and begin a comprehensive investigation. Sarah realized that her simple blind date had evolved into something resembling a witness protection scenario. The boring evening she had been dreading might have actually saved her life by putting her in the right place at the right time, with exactly the right person to help her. The safe house was an unremarkable apartment in a residential building, but Sarah quickly discovered that its ordinary appearance was deceptive. David's colleagues had transformed the space into a sophisticated command center, equipped with multiple computer screens, communication equipment, and surveillance monitors showing feeds from cameras positioned throughout the neighborhood. Sarah met David's team members, who introduced themselves simply as Alex and Morgan. Both had the same professional competence that David had displayed during their escape, and both treated the situation with a seriousness that made Sarah realize how much danger she had actually been in. Alex, a woman in her 30s with sharp eyes and an authoritative manner, immediately began interviewing Sarah about every detail of the past 3 weeks. "We need to understand the timeline completely," Alex explained. "When did the messages start? What was happening in your life at that time? Who knew your schedule? And what might have made you a target?" Sarah answered the questions as thoroughly as possible, but many of the connections seemed random and meaningless. She was a marketing coordinator for a small advertising firm, lived alone in a modest apartment, and couldn't think of anyone who would want to harm her. Morgan, meanwhile, was conducting a digital forensics investigation of Sarah's phone and computer. His fingers flew across multiple keyboards as he traced the source of the threatening messages and analyzed her digital footprint for potential vulnerabilities. These messages were sent through several layers of proxy servers and encrypted routing, he reported. "Whoever is doing this has sophisticated technical knowledge and significant resources." David coordinated between his team members while simultaneously reviewing case files from his previous work. His theory that the stalking might be connected to one of his past investigations was becoming more plausible as they uncovered evidence of the stalker's advanced capabilities. "This level of organization and technical sophistication suggests we're dealing with people who have been planning this operation for a long time," he concluded. As the investigation progressed, Alex discovered a concerning pattern in Sarah's social media activity and public records. "Someone has been systematically collecting information about you for at least 6 months," she reported. "They know your work schedule, your favorite restaurants, your exercise routine, and your social connections. This wasn't a random selection. You were specifically chosen for reasons we haven't identified yet." The revelation that she had been under surveillance for months without knowing it made Sarah feel violated and vulnerable. Every aspect of her private life had been studied and cataloged by strangers with unknown intentions. The thought that people had been watching her, learning her habits, and planning something sinister while she went about her daily routine was deeply disturbing. Morgan's technical analysis revealed additional troubling information. "The messages were coordinated with real-time location tracking," he explained. "They knew exactly where you were when each message was sent, which means they had access to either your phone's GPS data or were conducting physical surveillance. The photograph taken at the coffee shop was just the first time they revealed their presence." David studied the patterns of surveillance and communication, looking for clues about the stalker's ultimate objectives. "In my experience, this level of preparation usually indicates that harassment is just the beginning phase of a larger plan. They were testing your responses, learning your behavior patterns, and possibly preparing for an abduction or worse. Meeting me today might have disrupted their timeline." Sarah struggled to process the implications of what she was learning. Her quiet, ordinary life had somehow attracted the attention of dangerous people with sophisticated resources and long-term plans. The random blind date that she had been dreading might have inadvertently saved her from becoming a victim of something far more serious than harassment. Alex's investigation into Sarah's background revealed a potential connection that changed the entire investigation. "Sarah, did you know that your college roommate Jennifer Morrison was involved in a cyber-stalking case that David worked on 2 years ago?" The question caught both Sarah and David off guard, as neither had made that connection previously. Jennifer had been targeted by an ex-boyfriend who used technology to track and harass her after their relationship ended. David's team had been instrumental in identifying the stalker and providing evidence that led to his prosecution and imprisonment. Sarah remembered Jennifer mentioning the case but hadn't realized that David was involved in resolving it. "This could be the connection we were looking for," David said grimly. "If someone wanted revenge against me for that case, targeting you because of your friendship with Jennifer would be a way to hurt both of us. It explains why they chose you specifically and why they seemed to know about our date before it happened." The pieces of the puzzle were finally beginning to form a coherent picture, but the implications were more frightening than Sarah had imagined. The connection to Jennifer's case opened up an entirely new direction for the investigation. David immediately pulled the files from the cyber-stalking case he had worked on 2 years earlier, and the team began cross-referencing names, associates, and potential co-conspirators who might have wanted revenge. Sarah contacted Jennifer to warn her about the situation and gather additional information about anyone who might still hold grudges related to her case. Jennifer was shocked to learn that her past troubles might have put Sarah in danger. During their phone conversation, she revealed details about her ex-boyfriend Marcus Webb that hadn't been included in the official case files. Marcus always blamed everyone else for his problems, Jennifer explained. He specifically mentioned David's name several times, saying that the investigation was biased and that he would find a way to get even with everyone who testified against him. Morgan's database searches revealed that Marcus had been released from prison 6 months earlier, exactly when the surveillance of Sarah had begun according to Alex's timeline analysis. His prison records showed that he had spent his incarceration learning advanced computer programming and networking with other inmates who had technical expertise. Prison had apparently been an educational opportunity rather than a deterrent. This matches the profile perfectly, David explained to Sarah. Marcus has the motivation for revenge. He's had time to plan and recruit help, and he's acquired the technical skills necessary to conduct sophisticated surveillance operations. The timing of his release correlates exactly with when your harassment began. The team now had a clear suspect and could focus their investigation on Marcus's current activities, and associates Alex discovered that Marcus hadn't been working alone since his release. Prison records and subsequent surveillance indicated that he had connected with at least 3 other individuals with similar backgrounds in technology-enabled harassment and stalking. Together, they had formed what appeared to be a criminal organization specializing in revenge operations against law enforcement personnel and their associates. They're not just targeting you randomly, David told Sarah. You're part of a larger campaign against people connected to cases that resulted in convictions. They've probably been planning multiple operations simultaneously, using each case to refine their methods and escalate their activities. The revelation that Sarah was just one target in a broader criminal conspiracy was both terrifying and oddly reassuring. Morgan intercepted communications between Marcus and his associates that revealed the next phase of their plan. They were planning to escalate from surveillance and harassment to direct confrontation tonight, he reported. The coffee shop meeting was supposed to be the setup for an abduction. They didn't expect you to have professional protection, and now they're scrambling to adapt their plan. Sarah realized how close she had come to disaster. If David had been an ordinary blind date instead of someone with security expertise, she would likely have walked directly into Marcus's trap. The awkward first impressions that had made her want to leave early might have actually saved her life by keeping them in the coffee shop long enough for the threatening message to arrive while David was present. David's team coordinated with local law enforcement to set up surveillance on Marcus and his associates. The investigation had evolved from a protective operation into an active criminal pursuit with the potential to break up an entire network of revenge-motivated stalkers. Sarah found herself at the center of what might become a significant law enforcement operation. We have an opportunity to catch them in the act if we're willing to take some calculated risks, Alex explained. They're expecting you to be afraid and hiding, but if we can make them believe they still have a chance to complete their plan, we might be able to draw them into a situation where we can arrest the entire group. The proposal involved using Sarah as bait in a carefully controlled operation designed to catch Marcus and his team in the act of attempted abduction. David was clearly uncomfortable with the idea of putting Sarah at additional risk, but he also recognized that it might be the only way to ensure that the threats would end permanently. Sarah would have to decide whether she was willing to trust David's expertise enough to participate in what would essentially be a sting operation. I know this is asking a lot, David said, but if we don't stop them now, they'll just wait and try again later. And they'll probably target other people connected to my cases. This might be our best chance to end the threat not just to you, but to other potential victims. Sarah looked around the room at the team of professionals who had already demonstrated their competence in protecting her, and realized that she trusted them more than she had trusted anyone in a long time. The Irony wasn't lost on her that the blind date she had, approached with such reluctance, had turned into the most important relationship decision of her life. David's skills and connections were the only thing standing between her and people who wanted to harm her. And now she had to decide whether to trust him with an operation that would deliberately put her back in danger. Sarah agreed to participate in the sting operation after David's team spent hours explaining every detail of their plan and the safety measures they would implement. The operation would take place the following evening at a restaurant where Marcus's group expected Sarah to be having dinner alone. Unknown to them, the location would be surrounded by undercover agents, and Sarah would be wearing sophisticated tracking and communication devices. The preparation for the operation was intensive and nerve-wracking. Alex taught Sarah how to behave naturally while wearing hidden recording equipment and how to signal for help without alerting the suspects. Morgan provided her with a modified smartphone that would allow the team to track her location and monitor all communications. David coached her on how to engage with the suspects if they approached, gathering evidence while staying safe. The key is to act frightened, but not panicked, David explained during their training session. We want them to believe they're in control of the situation while we're actually managing every aspect of their approach. If anything feels wrong or dangerous, use the emergency signal immediately. We'll have agents positioned to reach you within seconds. Sarah practiced the operation dozens of times, rehearsing different scenarios and potential complications. The team had contingency plans for every situation they could anticipate, but Sarah knew that real criminal encounters rarely followed predictable patterns. Her safety would depend on David's expertise and her own ability to remain calm under pressure. The night of the operation, Sarah arrived at the restaurant exactly on schedule. Taking a table with clear sightlines to multiple exits as David had instructed, she ordered dinner and tried to appear relaxed while knowing that dangerous people were likely watching her every move. The normalcy of the restaurant environment felt surreal given the high-stakes operation taking place around her. Within 30 minutes, Sarah noticed a man at the bar who matched Marcus's description from the case files. He was trying to appear casual, but his attention kept returning to her table in a way that confirmed he was there for surveillance purposes. Sarah discreetly activated her recording equipment and prepared for what might be the most dangerous conversation of her life. Marcus approached her table after finishing his drink, using a prepared story about recognizing her from social media and asking if he could join her for coffee. Sarah agreed, following the script she had rehearsed with David's team. Marcus was charming and seemed genuinely friendly, which made the situation even more unsettling, given what she knew about his intentions. You know, I've been following your posts online, Marcus said casually. You have a really interesting life, and I've been hoping to meet you for a while. The comment confirmed that he had been stalking her social media, but he presented it as normal social interaction. Sarah realized how easily victims could be manipulated by predators who had studied their habits and preferences. The conversation continued for nearly an hour, with Marcus gradually steering the discussion toward suggesting they leave the restaurant together. He claimed to know about a great coffee shop nearby where they could continue talking. Sarah recognized this as the planned abduction attempt and prepared to give the signal for David's team to move in. Just as Sarah was about to activate her emergency signal, Marcus's demeanor suddenly changed. His friendly expression disappeared and he leaned forward with a threatening intensity. I know exactly who you are and why you're here, he said quietly. Your boyfriend David thought he was very clever, but we've been watching his team all day. This little trap isn't going to work the way you planned. Sarah's heart raced as she realized that Marcus had somehow detected the sting operation. The careful planning and preparation might have been compromised, leaving her genuinely vulnerable in a situation designed to capture criminals. She tried to remain calm while discreetly activating her emergency signal, hoping that David's team was still in position to help her. Marcus stood up from the table and gestured toward the restaurant's back exit. We're going to walk out of here together and you're going to act completely normal. My associates are positioned throughout this area, and they have instructions to hurt innocent people if you try to alert your security team. The only way to keep everyone safe is to come with me quietly. Sarah looked around the restaurant, trying to identify Marcus's associates and David's team members. The normal dinner crowd suddenly looked threatening as she realized that several people might be armed criminals or undercover agents. The sting operation had become a genuinely dangerous standoff, and her cooperation might be the only thing preventing violence in a crowded public space. As they moved toward the exit, Sarah caught sight of David positioned near the restaurant's kitchen, clearly torn between maintaining the operation's cover and intervening to protect her. She made eye contact with him briefly, trying to communicate that she was okay while hoping he had a plan to resolve the situation safely. The blind date that had started so awkwardly might be ending with both of their lives in serious danger. David's team had anticipated the possibility that their operation might be discovered, and they had prepared multiple contingency plans for exactly this scenario. As Sarah and Marcus approached the restaurant's back exit, Alex and Morgan were already moving to intercept Marcus's associates before they could threaten innocent bystanders. The operation shifted from a careful sting to an active arrest situation within seconds. Marcus realized that his escape route was being blocked just as they reached the exit door. He grabbed Sarah's arm, trying to use her as a shield while reaching for what appeared to be a weapon. Sarah remembered her training and broke free using the defensive techniques David had taught her, creating enough distance for the undercover agents to safely intervene. The arrest happened quickly and efficiently, with Marcus and his 3 associates being taken into custody, without any shots being fired or injuries sustained. David's team had successfully neutralized the immediate threat while gathering enough evidence to support serious criminal charges. Sarah watched from a safe distance as the people who had terrorized her for months were finally held accountable for their actions. In the aftermath of the arrests, Sarah learned the full scope of Marcus's revenge operation. His group had been targeting victims connected to over a dozen different cases, using increasingly sophisticated methods to track and harass people who had testified against criminals or helped with prosecutions. Sarah's case had been intended as a stepping stone to more serious crimes, including planned attacks against law enforcement officers. "You probably saved multiple lives by agreeing to participate in this operation," Alex told Sarah as they completed their debriefing. Marcus's group was escalating their activities with each case, and they were planning operations that could have resulted in serious injuries or deaths. "Your courage in facing them directly allowed us to stop them before anyone got hurt." David drove Sarah home after the arrests were completed, and they finally had an opportunity to process everything that had happened since their awkward first meeting in the coffee shop. The transformation from a disastrous blind date to a life-threatening criminal investigation had occurred so quickly that Sarah was still struggling to understand how much her life had changed in just 48 hours. "I owe you an apology for how our first date went," David said as they sat in his car outside her apartment building. "I was nervous about meeting you, and I had no idea that we were going to end up in the middle of a criminal investigation. This definitely wasn't the evening Emma had in mind when she set us up." Sarah laughed, realizing that their unusual beginning had actually been perfect preparation for facing danger together. Over the following weeks, Sarah and David continued seeing each other, building a relationship based on trust, shared experiences, and a deep appreciation for each other's strengths. David's technical expertise and protective instincts complemented Sarah's courage and determination. The relationship that had started with spilled sugar and awkward conversation had developed into something much deeper and more meaningful than either of them had expected. Emma was amazed when she learned about the events surrounding the blind date she had arranged. "I just thought you two would have fun together," she told Sarah. "I had no idea that David was some kind of security expert, and I definitely didn't know you were being stalked. I'm just glad that my matchmaking accidentally put you together at exactly the right time." Sarah agreed that the timing had been incredibly fortunate. The trial of Marcus and his associates resulted in lengthy prison sentences for all 4 men, effectively ending the threat they posed to Sarah and other potential victims. David testified about the technical aspects of their stalking operation, while Sarah provided victim impact testimony that helped the court understand the psychological effects of long-term harassment and surveillance. 6 months after their eventful first meeting, Sarah and David were engaged planning a wedding that would include Alex and Morgan as honored guests. Sarah often reflected on how wrong her first impressions had been, and how grateful she was that Emma had insisted on setting up what initially seemed like the worst blind date in history. The man she had laughed at for being clumsy and boring had turned out to be exactly the person she needed when her life was in danger. Their love story became legendary among their friends and family, Proof that sometimes the most unpromising beginnings can lead to extraordinary relationships. Sarah never tired of telling people about how her future husband had saved her life on their first date. Though she usually left out the part about initially finding him completely unsuitable, David's secret talents had indeed saved her. But more importantly, they had discovered that they were perfectly suited to face any challenge together.